He threw the phone across the room. Not gently, not in frustration. He whipped it against the wall with the kind of force that said, "I want you erased." The screen shattered. Claire Whitmore stood there, 26 years old, 3 weeks pregnant, and completely alone, staring at the cracked plastic on the floor, while Damian Blackwood straightened his cufflinks like she was a business call he'd already forgotten. "Don't ever contact me again," he said. Not "I'm sorry," not "let me explain." Just that. 7 words. Flat as pavement. She didn't cry in front of him. She'd made herself a promise about that. She picked up her coat, walked out the door, and didn't look back because she already knew what she'd see. Nothing. She would mean nothing to him the moment she crossed that threshold. 4 years later, he walked into her cafe. Sam. If this story already has your heart pounding, you're not alone. Drop a like, leave a comment with the city or country you're watching from, because I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. And if you're new here, subscribe and stay close, because the stories we tell on this channel don't let you go easy. Now, let's go back to where it all started. The cafe was called the Tidal Cup, and it smelled like burned coffee and sea salt, which Claire had decided was the most honest smell in the world. She'd opened it 3 years ago with $9,000 she'd saved working double shifts at a diner in Portland, and she'd built every inch of it herself. Not metaphorically, actually herself, with a level and a drill and YouTube tutorials at 2 in the morning after Emma was asleep. Emma, 4 years old, dark eyes, stubborn chin, the kind of laugh that made strangers at neighboring tables smile without realizing they were doing it. Claire didn't talk about Emma's father. When people asked, and in a town like Greyhaven, people always asked, because there was nothing else to do in winter except mind other people's business. She said simply that he wasn't in the picture. Most people let it go. A few pushed. She'd learned to look at those people with an expression so calm and so complete that the question died somewhere between their mouth and the air. She was good at that. Calm. She'd worked very hard at calm. It was a Tuesday morning in October when the bell above the door rang, and Claire was behind the counter writing the soup special on the chalkboard. Butternut squash, $7, comes with bread. And she turned around because she'd heard something familiar in the sound of those footsteps on the hardwood. Not a local's shuffle, not a tourist's hesitation, something deliberate, something that knew exactly where it was going. She turned around, and Damian Blackwood was standing in the doorway of her cafe, looking at her like he'd been punched in the chest and hadn't yet decided whether to fall. The chalk dropped out of her hand. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She was aware, in a distant, clinical way, that her heart had done something violent inside her rib cage, something that was not love and not hate, but some terrible mix of both, that had no clean name. He was older. Of course he was. So was she. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there before. He wore a dark coat, no tie, and he was looking at her the way a man looks when he's rehearsed something 100 times, and now that the moment is here, every word has abandoned him. Claire. His voice was the same. She hated that. She'd somehow hoped it would sound different, thinner, maybe, like something that had earned its damage. "We're not open yet," she said. It was 8:52 in the morning. They opened at 9. It was the only thing she could think to say that wasn't "get out," or "how dare you," or the other dozen things that had been sitting behind her teeth for 4 years, growing teeth of their own. "I know." He didn't move from the doorway. I didn't come here to—" He stopped, pressed his mouth closed, tried again. "I'm in town on business. There's a property on Anchor Street. I didn't know you were here." She looked at him for a long moment. She was trying to decide if that was true. Damian Blackwood was a man who knew things. That was his particular talent, his particular danger. He always knew more than he let on, always had more information than anyone in the room, filed it away with the patience of someone who understood that knowledge was its own kind of weapon. "Then you can leave," she said, "and we can both go back to not knowing where each other are." She turned back to the chalkboard. She picked up the chalk. Her hand was not shaking. She was very focused on her hand not shaking. She heard him take a breath. She heard him not leave. "Claire, I said we're not open. I heard you." She turned around again because standing with her back to him felt wrong, felt like leaving something unguarded. He was still in the doorway. He hadn't come further in, which she noticed, which meant something she wasn't willing to examine yet. Behind him, through the salt-filmed window, she could see the harbor and the gray October sky and the lobster boats already out on the water, normal, ordinary, everything that her life here was supposed to be. "Why are you still standing there?" she asked. "Because I'm trying to figure out how to be a person right now," he said, "and it's taking longer than I'd like." That was honest enough that it caught her off guard. She'd prepared herself over the years for a lot of versions of this conversation. She'd prepared for cold Damien, the one who looked at her like she was a minor inconvenience. She'd prepared for angry Damien, the one who would want to know why she left without a word. She'd prepared for the version where he already knew about Emma and had come here with lawyers and a plan. She had not prepared for this version, uncertain, standing in a doorway, using the word trying. "Anchor Street," she said finally. "What property?" "The old Harmon Cannery. Someone's looking to convert it to residential units. I was brought in to assess." That was real. She'd heard the town council talking about the Harmon building for months. It had been sitting empty since she arrived, a squat brick building at the end of the harbor road that smelled like decades-old fish and rotting timber. Someone from Boston or New York would eventually buy it and turn it into $40 a night rental units. Of course, it was Damien's money behind it. Of course. "Fine," she said. "Come back at 9 if you want coffee." She turned around again. This time she heard him leave. The bell above the door rang. She stared at the chalkboard and didn't write anything for a full minute and a half. Then Emma came downstairs. She lived above the cafe in a 2-bedroom apartment that was nothing like the downtown Chicago condo where she'd lived with Damien. It had slanted ceilings and a bathroom where the hot water took 4 minutes to arrive and a view of the marina that made every hard morning slightly more bearable. Emma slept in the small bedroom with the yellow walls that Claire had painted herself at 6 in the morning on a day off because there had been no one else to do it. Emma came down the interior stairs in her socks, carrying her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Buttons, who had been washed so many times his ears were a slightly different color than the rest of him, and she walked directly to the counter and climbed onto the stool at the end, which was her stool, which she treated with the absolute authority of someone who had never once questioned her right to it. "Is it soup day?" Emma asked. "It's soup day," Claire said. "Butternut?" "Butternut." Emma nodded with the gravity of a small politician approving a budget. "Okay." She arranged Mr. Buttons on the counter next to her and looked out the window at the harbor. "There's a man outside," she said. Claire went still. "He's just standing there," Emma continued, with the clinical observation of a 4-year-old who had not yet learned that some things were better left unnoted. "He's looking at the boats." Claire walked to the window, slowly. She stood at the side of the glass so she wasn't directly visible, which was a habit she'd developed without ever fully admitting to herself what it meant. Damien was standing outside on the sidewalk, hands in his coat pockets, looking at the harbor. Not at the cafe. At the water. He looked, from here, like a man who had not slept in some time and was using the ocean to hold the fatigue at bay. "Do you know him?" Emma asked. "No," Claire said. She turned away from the window and went to start the espresso machine. The lie sat in her mouth like something with the wrong shape. Emma went back to studying the boats with the complete and total lack of self-consciousness that only very young children and very old people ever fully achieved. At 9:15, the doorbell rang again. Damien came in. He sat at the counter, 1 seat away from Emma's stool, because Emma was still there with Mr. Buttons and her orange juice, and he ordered a black coffee, and he did not look at Emma. Claire watched him, not looking at Emma, with the particular attention of someone reading the space between words. "You want anything else?" she asked. "No." He wrapped both hands around the mug. He was not wearing gloves, which struck her as careless for a man who was always so precise. His knuckles were slightly red from the cold. Emma looked at him. She was not shy. She had never been shy. It was both her greatest asset and Claire's most reliable source of anxiety. "That's a big coat," Emma said. Damien looked at her. Something moved across his face. Not recognition, not yet, just the reflexive attention of someone unused to being addressed by children. "Yeah," he said. "It's cold out." "We have soup," Emma told him. "It's butternut." "I'll keep that in mind." Emma looked at him a moment longer with the unfiltered appraisal of someone who had not yet learned to disguise her opinions. Then she seemed to decide he was acceptable, nodded once, and went back to her orange juice. Claire refilled his coffee without asking. He looked up when she did it. and she made herself look back, because not looking would mean something too, would be a different kind of admission. "How long?" he asked. She knew what he was asking. 4 years, she said, in Greyhaven, 3 since the cafe. "You built this. I built this." He looked around the room. It was small and worn in the ways that honest places get worn. The counter edge scuffed from elbows. The window seat cushion faded from afternoon sun. The ceiling fan that wobbled slightly on the third setting. Nothing about it looked like the life she used to have. Nothing about it looked like him. "It's good," he said. "I know." He almost smiled at that. Almost. She could see him stop it. She went to the other end of the counter to take an order from old Mr. Pratt, who came in every morning for a plain coffee and a piece of toast, and who had lived in Greyhaven his entire 78 years and treated the cafe like a living room he happened to pay for. She could feel Damien's presence at the other end of the counter with the specific, exhausting awareness that she had spent 4 years trying to leave behind. Emma finished her orange juice and climbed down from her stool. She walked past Damien on her way to the stairs, then stopped, turned, and looked at him with her head tilted slightly to the left. "What's your name?" she asked. Claire heard this from 6 feet away and felt the specific, immediate terror of someone watching 2 live wires get very close to each other. Damien looked at Emma. His face had gone carefully neutral, which was the most telling thing about it. Damien only went carefully neutral when something had hit him somewhere real. "Damien," he said. "I'm Emma," she said. "That's Mr. Buttons." She held up the rabbit. Damien looked at the rabbit. "He's old, but he's still good," Emma told him, with the conviction of someone making a legal argument. Then she went upstairs. The cafe had 3 other customers in it. None of them were paying attention. Claire picked up a cloth and began wiping the counter with the methodical focus of someone who needed to keep her hands doing something. "Claire." His voice was very quiet. "Don't," she said. "She has my—" "Don't." She looked at him directly. "Not here. Not like this." He looked down at his coffee. His jaw was tight. She could see him doing the arithmetic that she had already done 4 years ago, and she felt nothing about it, or told herself she felt nothing, which was its own particular kind of something. "I need to—" he started. "You need to finish your coffee," she said, "and then you need to go to Anchor Street and look at your building, and tonight you can call whatever lawyer you have on retainer and figure out what you want to say to me, and then you can come back tomorrow when the cafe is quiet, and we can have that conversation like 2 adults. She kept her voice level. She kept her hands moving. "But you don't get to walk in here after 4 years and blow up my daughter's morning because you're processing something." He didn't answer. He picked up the coffee mug and drank what was left of it in silence. Then he set it down, left a 20 on the counter for a $3 coffee, and walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. He didn't turn around. "She looks like my mother," he said. Claire didn't answer. The bell rang. He left. Claire stood at the counter for a moment with the cloth in her hand and the $20 bill in front of her, and the sound of Emma moving around upstairs. And she let herself have exactly 30 seconds of falling apart, the kind that happened entirely inside, invisible to any customer who might look over, just a small internal collapse that she then very carefully put back together. Then she picked up the 20, put it in the register, and went to start a new pot of coffee. Because the cafe was open, because there were orders to take and tables to wipe, and a soup that needed stirring. Because Emma would come back down in 20 minutes wanting to show her something she'd drawn, some figure with enormous round eyes and stick arms that was either a cat or a person. Emma was never entirely clear on the distinction. Because this was her life, she'd built it with her own hands, and she was not going to let Damien Blackwood stand in the doorway of it and make her forget that. He came back the next morning at 8:47. Claire heard the bell and knew it was him before she looked up. She couldn't explain that. Couldn't explain how a sound she'd heard 1,000 times in the last 3 years had suddenly acquired a specific weight, a particular quality of dread. She looked up anyway, because not looking would be worse. He was wearing the same coat, different shirt. He'd slept, or he'd tried to. She could see the effort in the way he was holding himself, that deliberate straightness that men like Damien used to disguise the fact that something had taken the floor out from under them. She poured a coffee before he sat down, set it at the end of the counter. He sat. They were alone. Emma was upstairs. It was Wednesday, which meant Mrs. Halloran wouldn't come in until 9:30, and the fishermen who stopped by on weekdays had already been and gone. The cafe was quiet in the specific way that small towns are quiet in October. The tourists long departed, the winter regulars not yet fully settled into their rhythms. "You said we could talk," he said. "I said you could come back." She put both hands flat on the counter. "I didn't promise you anything else." "Fair enough." He wrapped his hands around the mug. He didn't drink. "Is she mine?" She looked at him for a long moment. The question was absurd. They both knew it was absurd. They had both known it from the moment he'd looked at Emma yesterday, from the moment he'd said she looks like my mother with his back turned and his hand on the doorframe like he needed the physical support. But he'd asked it cleanly, directly, and she found she could respect that even while resenting everything else. "Yes," she said. He exhaled. It wasn't a dramatic sound, just a long, quiet release of air, like something he'd been holding since yesterday had finally been given permission to leave. He stared at the counter. She watched his jaw work, watched him do whatever it was that Damian Blackwood did when he was trying to stay controlled in a situation that had moved completely outside his control. "How long did you know?" he asked. "Before you left." 3 weeks. He looked up at that. "You knew when I found you with Olivia?" "Yes." She kept her voice flat. Not cold, exactly. More like something that had been forged at high temperature and was now simply hard. "I was going to tell you that night. I'd made an appointment. I had everything. I'd worked out what I was going to say. And then I came home early and found my sister in our bedroom, and you—" She stopped, let a breath pass. "And then you told me never to contact you again." He closed his eyes. 1 second, 2. Then he opened them. "Claire, I'm not done." She hadn't planned to say any of this. She'd planned to be measured, legal almost. The kind of conversation you have when you've rehearsed it in the mirror enough times that the words have lost their nerve endings. But she was 4 years of early mornings and hot water that took 4 minutes and yellow walls she'd painted alone, and Measured had apparently decided to take the morning off. "You don't get to say my name like that, not yet. Maybe not ever. You told me not to contact you. I didn't contact you. You made a choice, and I made a choice, and we both have to live in what came out of those choices. You hid my daughter from me. I protected my daughter from a man who had just told me I didn't exist." The words landed. She could see them land. The slight shift in his posture. The way his hands tightened around the mug. He didn't deflect. That surprised her. The Damien she'd known had been extraordinary at deflection, at pivoting a conversation to higher ground before anything could reach him. This version sat with it, let it sit. "That's fair," he said finally. "I know it's fair. I'm not saying it to agree with you. I'm saying it because it's the truth and because—" He stopped, pressed his mouth together. Something was moving behind his eyes that she recognized from years ago. The specific look he got when he was trying to locate honesty in himself and finding the path overgrown. "Because I have to say it out loud or none of the rest of this means anything." "None of what rest?" she asked. "What do you think happens now, Damien?" He looked at her directly. "I don't know. That's not good enough." "I know that too." He finally drank the coffee, set the mug down. "I'm not here to take anything from you. I want to be clear about that. I'm not coming in with lawyers. Not yet. Not unless you make that the only option." He paused. "I just want to understand what I missed." 4 years, she said. "That's what you missed." "I know." She was born in February. She weighed 7 pounds and she screamed from the first second, and she had this black hair that went in every direction. And there was no one in that hospital room with me except a nurse named Patricia who had bad knees and hummed to herself when she thought no one was listening. Her voice didn't break. She wouldn't let it break. She took her first steps in this kitchen. She said her first word, which was more, by the way, which tells you everything you need to know about her personality. She had a fever of 104 when she was 18 months old, and I sat up with her for 2 nights straight with a wet cloth on her forehead, because I was terrified and I was alone and there was no one to call. She looked at him steadily. "That's what you missed. Not a concept. Not a child in the abstract. 4 years of specific, daily, exhausting, impossible things." He was very still. "And you want to understand it," she said. "Fine. But understanding it doesn't give it back. And understanding it doesn't give you rights you haven't earned." "What would earning them look like?" he asked. She opened her mouth, closed it. She hadn't expected that question. had expected anger or justification or the cold negotiating mode that Damien slipped into when emotional territory got too close. Instead, he was looking at her with something that resembled genuine asking, genuine willingness to be told. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I haven't figured that out." He nodded. Like that was acceptable. Like that was even expected. From upstairs, she heard Emma's feet hit the floor. The specific thump-thump of a 4-year-old who treated every surface as though gravity were a personal challenge. Damien's eyes went to the ceiling instinctively, tracking the sound, and Claire watched his face do something complicated and involuntary that he didn't have enough control left to hide. "She sleeps late," Claire said, unnecessarily. "Does she always—" He stopped himself. "What?" "Nothing." He shook his head. "I was going to ask something stupid." "Ask it." He looked back down at the mug. "Does she have nightmares?" The question was so specific and so unexpected that it caught Claire sideways. Why? "My mother had nightmares, bad ones, every night until she was 7, and then they just stopped. She always said she outgrew them." His mouth pulled in something that wasn't quite a smile. "I used to think that was something people said to sound better. Then I got old enough to understand that some fears genuinely do have expiration dates." Claire stared at him. This was the thing she had forgotten, or had tried to forget, the same way you tried to forget a song that had lived in your head for too long. That Damien, under the empire and the silence and the particular brutality that came with the kind of life he ran, had moments of being entirely human, quietly, disarmingly, without any apparent awareness that he was doing it. She had loved him for that, once. She resented it now because it complicated things she needed to be simple. "She doesn't have nightmares," she said. "She sleeps like a stone." "Good," he said. Just that. The sound of small feet on the stairs made them both turn. Emma appeared at the bottom landing in her pajamas, hair absolutely chaotic, Mr. Buttons tucked under one arm. She stopped when she saw Damien. She was not startled. She tilted her head in that particular way she had, the way that Claire recognized as Emma's primary data-gathering posture. "You came back," Emma said. "I did," Damien said. Emma processed this. "Do you want soup again? It's a different kind today." "What kind?" "I don't know. Mom didn't tell me yet." She looked at Claire with the flat expression of someone registering a minor grievance. "Tomato," Claire said. Emma looked back at Damien. "Tomato," she confirmed, as though Claire had needed the translation service. She climbed onto her stool, 2 seats from where Damien was sitting, and arranged Mr. Buttons on the counter with the deliberate care of someone seating a dignitary. The three of them existed in that kitchen for a moment in a silence that had too many layers to name. Claire turned to start Emma's oatmeal. She kept her back to Damien for exactly 30 seconds, which was as long as she trusted herself to do it, and then she turned around because turning her back to Damien had always been a mistake. He was looking at Emma, not with the desperate, consuming look she'd half expected, the look of a man trying to compress 4 years into a single glance. "I was looking at her the way you look at something you're trying to understand honestly, steadily, without pretense. And Emma, with the absolute social fearlessness of a child who has never been given reason to doubt she is worth knowing, looked back. 'Your rabbit's missing a button,' Damien said." Emma looked down at Mr. Buttons, considered. "He used to have 2 eyes," she said. "He lost one. It fell off in the wash." "Does that bother him?" Emma thought about it very seriously. "I don't think he minds," she said. "He can still see fine." "How do you know?" "Because he hasn't bumped into anything." She said it with the absolute logical certainty of someone who found the conclusion obvious, then returned her attention to arranging the rabbit's ears in a position that apparently satisfied some internal aesthetic standard. Claire put the oatmeal on the stove and gripped the handle of the pot and stared at the blue gas flame for a moment with the specific focus of someone trying to put a wall between themselves and a feeling. He came back the next morning, and the one after that. By the 4th morning, she stopped being surprised by the sound of the bell. By the 5th morning, she had his coffee poured before he reached the stool. She hated that she'd started doing it. She told herself it was muscle memory, the same automation that meant she knew Mr. Pratt's order before he opened his mouth. She didn't fully believe herself. On the 6th morning, he didn't sit at the counter. He sat at the window table. She brought the coffee to him without comment. He had papers with him, actual printed documents, not a phone, and she registered that he still preferred paper for anything he was thinking seriously about, which was a detail she had not expected to remember and resented immediately for remembering. "The Harmon Building," he said when she set the mug down. "What about it?" "The structural assessments came back. The bones are fine, but someone did something criminal to the plumbing about 15 years ago. Whoever it is will need to gut the entire east wing." She looked at him. "Why are you telling me this?" He looked up from the papers. "Because you live here. Because it's your town. Because—" He paused. "Because I'm trying to have a normal conversation with you, and I don't know how to do that without a place to start." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because standing over the conversation felt wrong, like holding a position she hadn't actually earned. Maybe because she was tired of performing a distance that was costing her as much energy as the closeness she was trying to avoid. "You never told me," she said. "Why Olivia?" His hands went still on the papers. "I need to know," she said. "Not to hurt either of us. I just need it to make sense in some way that I can actually believe." He looked at her for a long time. Outside, the harbor was doing what the harbor did in October. Gray and restless, gulls working the wind above the lobster boats. Finally, he said, "It wasn't about Olivia. Don't do that. I'm not excusing it. I'm trying to explain the actual thing that happened." He set the papers aside. I'd gotten confirmation on something, a deal that had gone wrong in a way that meant people were going to get hurt because of my decisions. And I couldn't talk to you about it. I couldn't talk to you about any of it, because keeping you away from that part of my life was the only thing I was certain I was doing right. He looked down at his hands. And Olivia called that night. She was drunk and unhappy about something with her boyfriend, and I made a catastrophic decision that had nothing to do with wanting her and everything to do with wanting to stop being inside my own head for 5 minutes. The silence stretched. "That's the most pathetic thing you've ever said to me," Claire said. "Yes." "And you think that explains it?" "No, I think that's what happened. There's no version of it that explains it." She sat with that. The oatmeal was going to burn if she didn't get up, so she got up, and she went to the stove, and she stood with her back to him again, stirring, and she thought about Olivia, who had been 23 years old and difficult and luminously unhappy in all the ways that beautiful, overlooked younger sisters sometimes were. She thought about how much she had loved her sister before that night, and how that love had not vanished, had never vanished, but had simply become a thing she carried in a locked room. "She called me," Claire said, still stirring. 2 years ago. Olivia. She was in Portland, she said. She cried so long I had to put the phone down and check on Emma and come back, and she was still crying." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I forgave her." She turned around. "I do. I did. That's not the issue." She looked across the cafe at him. "The issue is that forgiveness doesn't fix the fact that the two people I trusted most in the world chose each other instead of me. And I've been carrying that alone for 4 years, and Emma doesn't know any of it. And you are sitting in my window table with your building assessments, like time works differently for you than it does for the rest of us." He stood up. Not aggressively. He pushed the chair back slowly and stood with his hands at his sides. And she stayed where she was at the stove, because she wasn't going to retreat across her own kitchen. "You're right," he said, "about all of it. Stop agreeing with me." "Why?" "Because it's harder to be angry at someone who keeps agreeing with you, and I need—" She stopped herself. "You need to be angry," he said quietly. She looked at him. She could feel the 4 years pressing against the back of her sternum like something physical, some accumulated weight of mornings done alone and decisions made alone and fear experienced alone, and she hated that he was standing in her cafe seeing it because she had worked so hard to keep it invisible. "Emma is mine," she said. "Whatever happens, however any of this goes, that doesn't change." "I know." "She doesn't need a father who appears when it's convenient and leaves when it's not. She's 4. She's already attached to the people in her life. You don't get to walk in and become important to her and then walk back out." "I'm not going to walk out." "You say that now." "I know that I say it now." His voice was steady. Not defensive, just steady, like something load-bearing. "I also know that you have every reason to believe I'm saying it because it's the right thing to say, and not because I mean it. So I'm not asking you to believe me, I'm asking you to watch." Emma came downstairs. She was dressed now, mostly. She'd put her shoes on the wrong feet, which was a thing she did with such consistency that Claire had begun to wonder if it was intentional. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked between them with the instinctive antennae of a child who has learned to read the temperature of a room. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Everything's fine, Bug," Claire said. Emma looked at Damien. "Why does your face look like that?" Damien blinked. "Like what?" "Like when I dropped Mr. Buttons in a puddle and I had to wash him and wait." She studied him. "Like something happened and you're waiting to find out if it's okay." Damien was very quiet for a moment. "That's about right," he said. Emma absorbed this. Then she walked to her stool, climbed up, and said, "The waiting part is the worst part, but usually it's okay after." She picked up Mr. Buttons, adjusted his one remaining eye so it faced forward, and looked at Claire. "Can I have oatmeal?" "Already on," Claire said. The three of them fell into the morning. Emma ate. Damien drank his coffee and did not look at his papers again. Claire moved between the counter and the kitchen with the practiced efficiency of 3 years of doing exactly this, and she was aware, constantly, exhaustingly aware, of the unfamiliar gravity in the room, the way the ordinary shape of the morning had shifted because there was a person in it who hadn't been there yesterday. It was 9:40 when the doorbell rang and Olivia Whitmore walked in. Claire heard it wrong at first. She looked up and saw a woman in a gray coat standing in the doorway, with her hands clasped in front of her and her hair pulled back, and it took a full 3 seconds for her brain to connect the image to the name because she had not once, in 4 years, seen her sister in person. Olivia looked at Claire. Then she looked at Damien. Then she looked at the small girl sitting at the counter eating oatmeal with a one-eyed stuffed rabbit propped beside her. The color left her face in a single, complete movement. "I should have called," Olivia said. Her voice was barely there. "I know. I should have called. I was driving through and I thought, I didn't know you two were—" "We're not," Claire said. "I'm here about a building," Damien said at the same moment, in a tone so flat it could have cut glass. Olivia stood in the doorway with the three of them arranged in front of her like a verdict. Emma had stopped eating and was watching with the open, uncomplicated curiosity of someone who did not know enough to be uncomfortable yet, and that the fact that Emma was watching was what made Claire cross the cafe to the door, take her sister by the elbow, and steer her gently but absolutely outside. The morning air was cold. The harbor smell hit them both. "You have 10 minutes, Claire said, "and you're going to say what you came to say, and then I'm going back inside." Olivia's eyes were wet already. She pressed her lips together and looked at the water and then back at Claire and said, "She looks exactly like you." "She looks like herself," Claire said. "What do you want, Olivia?" Her sister's mouth worked. She was 30 now, 3 years younger than Claire, and she had the look of someone who had done enough genuine reckoning with themselves to have earned a kind of quiet that hadn't been there before. Not peace exactly, more like the stillness that comes after something has burned through completely. "I don't want anything," Olivia said. I needed you to know that I know, that I've known for 4 years what I did and what it cost, and I don't—" Her voice broke at the edge, and she pushed through it. "I'm not asking for us to be what we were. I know that's gone. I just couldn't keep driving past the exit knowing you were here and not stop." Claire looked at her sister. She looked at the shape of her face, which was their mother's face, which was also in some lights Emma's face. And she thought about the locked room where she kept the love she still hadn't been able to stop feeling. "You should have called," Claire said. "I know. You can't just—" She stopped. "Emma doesn't know who you are. She doesn't know anything about any of this. She's 4 years old and her world is this cafe and this town and her rabbit and her preschool friends. And I have worked incredibly hard to make sure that's all she has to carry right now." "I know," Olivia said again. "I'm not trying to disrupt anything. I swear." "And Damien is in there." Olivia closed her eyes briefly. "I saw." "So you understand that today is not a good day." "Is there a good day?" Claire almost laughed. It came out wrong. Not quite a laugh, not quite the other thing. "No," she said. "There probably isn't." She looked at her sister for another moment, and then she said, in a voice that was quieter than she meant it to be, "I forgave you. I told you that. But forgiveness isn't a key. It doesn't open things back up. It just means I'm not carrying the anger anymore." She crossed her arms against the cold. You can come back. Not today. Sometime. We'll figure out what that looks like. Olivia nodded. Once. Quick. Like she didn't trust herself to do it more slowly without falling apart. She left without going back inside, which was the right choice. And Claire stood outside for a moment after her car disappeared around the harbor bend and watched the gulls and the gray water and thought that of all the things she had imagined about this chapter of her life, none of them had included the morning when everything came back at once. She went back inside. Damien was washing Emma's oatmeal bowl in the cafe sink, which was not something she had given him permission to do, which was also, she noticed, registering the feeling before she could stop it, not the action of a man running a performance. Emma was telling him something about a drawing she was going to make, something with a whale in it. She hadn't mentioned the woman in the doorway. Claire stood at the threshold of the cafe for exactly 1 second and looked at the two of them, the large man in the dark coat standing at her sink and the small girl with the wrong-footed shoes explaining the compositional importance of whale tails, and felt the specific terrible weight of a door closing on what her life had been. Not the end of something, the end of the version of something that could still be undone. 3 days after Olivia's visit, Claire found the envelope. It was tucked under the cafe's rear door. Not the front, not the public entrance where anyone might leave something, but the back door that opened onto the narrow service alley behind the building. The door that only someone who had specifically looked for it would know existed. Plain white envelope, no return address, her name written in block letters that were too careful to be natural. The handwriting of someone disguising their handwriting. She opened it at the counter before the cafe opened, with the lights still low and the espresso machine cycling through its warm-up, and Emma asleep upstairs. Inside was a single photograph, printed on regular paper like someone had used an office printer in a hurry. The image was grainy, but clear enough. It was Emma, at her preschool. Standing in the yard during outdoor time, laughing at something off camera, Mr. Buttons tucked under her arm because Emma brought Mr. Buttons everywhere, including preschool, which had been a whole negotiation with the teachers in September. The photograph had been taken from outside the fence. Claire sat down on the floor behind the counter. Not because her legs gave out. She was very deliberate about it. She chose to sit. She put her back against the cabinet and her knees up and the photograph face down on the floor beside her, and she breathed. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The method her therapist in Portland had given her, back when Emma was 6 months old, and Claire had been running on no sleep, and too much fear, and something close to the edge of a breakdown she'd refused to name. 4 in, 4 out. Someone had been watching her daughter. She picked up the photograph again, looked at the angle, taken through the chain-link fence on the east side of the preschool yard, which backed onto a public parking area. Anyone could stand there. Anyone could look like a parent waiting to pick up a child or a person cutting through to the hardware store. Emma was completely unaware. She was laughing. The laugh was so recognizable that Claire's chest contracted around it like a fist. She looked at the back of the photograph. Nothing. She looked at the inside of the envelope again. Nothing else. She sat there for 6 minutes. She counted them on the clock above the pastry case. Then she got up, put the envelope and the photograph in the zippered pocket of her apron, and finished opening the cafe. She called Damien at 8:30. She had his number because he'd written it on a napkin on his 3rd visit, which she'd kept without deciding to keep it, which had annoyed her for 3 days before she'd admitted she was going to use it. He answered on the 2nd ring. Claire, I need you to come in before the morning rush. A pause. The quality of the pause told her he'd heard something in her voice that she hadn't intended to put there. 20 minutes, he said. He made it in 15. She showed him the photograph without preamble, without context. She set it on the table between them and watched his face. She watched it because she needed to know, needed to see, with her own eyes, whether what crossed his face was surprise or recognition. It was surprise, followed immediately by something that darkened his eyes in a way she hadn't seen before. Something operational. The part of him that she'd always understood was there but had never been directly confronted with. When did you find this? He said. It wasn't a question. This morning, under the back door. He picked up the photograph, studied it. His hands were steady, which unsettled her in the way that competent calm always unsettles you when you're frightened. The preschool on Marsh Road, he said. You know it. I've driven past it. He set the photograph down. Have you shown anyone else? No. Good. He looked up at her. Don't. Don't. She said the word back to him with a specific quietness that made him go still. Damien, someone photographed my daughter through a fence and left the picture under my door. Do not give me operational instructions right now. Tell me what this is. He held her gaze. I don't know yet. Is it connected to you? The question sat between them. She watched him decide whether to answer it honestly, watched him weigh the options with the speed of someone who had been doing that calculation his whole adult life. And she kept her eyes on his face and her hands flat on the table because she was not going to let him manage her. Possibly, he said. She stood up. The chair scraped back. Claire, you brought this here. Her voice was low. The morning customers were starting to arrive. She could hear the bell, could hear the scrape of chairs and the low conversation of people settling in. And she kept her voice under the ambient noise with the discipline of someone who had learned a long time ago that scenes in public cost more than they were worth. You brought whatever this is to my town, to Emma's preschool. I don't know that for certain. How many people know you've been coming here? He was quiet. How many, Damien? My driver, my head of security. He paused. And whoever's been watching me. Who's watching you? There's a faction. He stopped, pressed his mouth flat. Then, as though he'd made a decision, he said it plainly. When I started spending time here, reducing my presence in Chicago, there are people who interpret that as weakness, who would see me distracted by, he glanced toward Emma's empty stool, by personal matters, as an opportunity. An opportunity for what? To apply pressure. She stared at him. My 4-year-old daughter is pressure. To them. Yes. He said it without flinching, and she understood that this was its own form of respect, not cushioning it, not making it softer than it was. They're not going to hurt her, Claire. This is a message. This is someone saying we know where to find you so that I'll come back to Chicago and resume. I don't care about your Chicago, she said. I care about the fact that my daughter went to school yesterday morning and there was someone behind a fence taking pictures of her, and I didn't know and she didn't know, and her voice cracked at the edges and she stopped it there, clamped down on it. She's 4. She still sleeps with a stuffed rabbit. She explains to strangers that her rabbit lost an eye in the wash, and it doesn't matter because he can still see fine. She looked at him with something that had moved beyond anger into a territory she didn't have a clean word for. You don't get to bring this world to her. I know, he said. That's not enough. I know that too. He leaned forward, both forearms on the table, weight forward, the posture of someone who was not going to retreat. Let me handle this? Absolutely not. Claire, you handling things is what got us here. She picked up the photograph, slid it back into the envelope, put it in her apron pocket. I'm going to call the local police and file a report about someone photographing children through the preschool fence. That's what I'm doing, and you're going to go back to whatever you need to go back to and fix whatever you broke that led to this envelope on my back step. If I leave now, it makes it worse. If you stay, Emma is in danger. If I run, they follow. She looked at him for a long moment. The cafe was filling up around them. Ordinary Wednesday morning, Mr. Pratt with his toast, 2 women from the library who came in on Wednesdays, a man in work boots she didn't recognize who was looking at his phone. Normal. Ordinary. The life she had built. Then what? She said quietly. What do you suggest? Let me make some calls today. I need 24 hours. And Emma. She doesn't go to preschool today. His voice was steady. You say she's sick. Keep her here, with you, where I can… He stopped. Where you can what? Where there are people nearby. He looked at her directly. I have 2 men in town. They've been here since I got here. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. You should know that. They're not watching you. They're watching for anyone watching me. Last night, one of them flagged a car that's been parked on the Harbor Road for 2 days. The information hit her in layers. She sat back down. You had men in my town. Since the first day. And you didn't tell me. I didn't know yet if it was necessary. She looked at him and felt the particular exhaustion of understanding that there were entire systems operating around her life that she had not consented to and could not fully see. Is there anything else you haven't told me that's directly relevant to my daughter's safety? He held her gaze. Something shifted in it. The specific shift of a man deciding to burn a bridge because the bridge was already on fire. There's a man named Carver. He's been with the organization for 11 years. He came up through the Chicago operation. He runs distribution for the Northeastern Corridor, and 6 weeks ago I began the process of removing him because he's been moving product through a route that compromises some very specific arrangements I've spent 3 years building to keep violence away from civilian areas. He said it cleanly, factually. Carver does not accept being removed gracefully. And Carver has been, for the last 3 weeks, working out what I care about most. The cafe noise filled the silence between them. And now he knows, Claire said. Now he knows. She put both palms flat on the table. She looked at her own hands, the small scar on her right index finger from a knife slip 2 years ago, the callus on her left palm from the drill handle, the short nails that she kept short because long nails and cafe work were incompatible, her hands, her life. Get your men to the preschool, she said. Today, before anyone arrives for drop-off. I don't care if school has already started. I want someone there watching that fence. She stood up. And then you're going to sit there and drink your coffee, and when Emma comes downstairs, you're going to be completely normal because she reads rooms and I will not have her frightened in her own home. She picked up his mug and refilled it without him asking, set it back down. And then you're going to make your calls and you're going to fix this. He looked up at her. All right, he said. And Damien. She kept her voice entirely flat. If anything happens to her because of who you are, there is no version of this story where you exist in our lives afterward. Not as a father, not as a contact, not as a person I once knew. You understand me. I understand you, he said. Emma came downstairs at 8:50. She was wearing a purple shirt and her shoes on the wrong feet again and carrying Mr. Buttons by one ear. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and assessed the room and then walked to her stool and climbed up and looked at Damien. You're here early, she said. I am, he said. Did you eat breakfast? Not yet. Emma turned to Claire with the expression of someone reporting a civic emergency. Mom, he didn't eat breakfast. I heard, Claire said. Can he have oatmeal? He can have whatever he wants. Emma turned back to Damien with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully navigated a bureaucratic process. You can have oatmeal, she said. It's good. It's better than it sounds. Damien looked at the small girl with the rabbit and the wrong-footed shoes, and something moved across his face that he didn't try to stop this time. I believe you, he said. Claire made the oatmeal. She moved around the kitchen and took orders and smiled at Mr. Pratt, and refilled the library women's coffees and watched the man in the work boots until he left, noting the direction he walked. And she did all of this with the absolute controlled functioning of someone whose hands know their work well enough that the mind can be somewhere else entirely. The mind was on the envelope in her apron pocket, on the fence at the edge of the preschool yard, on Carver, whoever Carver was, and the 11 years he'd spent inside a world that Claire had always known existed but had managed to keep at a theoretical distance. On the specific horror of the photograph, not threatening in any explicit way, which somehow made it worse, the absence of explicit threat being its own precise and sophisticated kind of message. At 11 o'clock, Damien's phone buzzed. He looked at it, and she was watching his face when he did, and she saw it. Not alarm. Something deeper than alarm. The thing that comes after alarm when you've been in enough situations that alarm itself has been refined into something more precise and far colder. He stood up from the window table. He came to the counter and leaned across it and kept his voice so low she had to lean in to hear it. They found the car on the Harbor Road, he said. It's registered to a holding company in Delaware. The man who was in it left on foot about an hour ago. He paused. One of my men followed him. And? He went into the building next door. She looked at him. The one with the apartment above the hardware store, he said. He's been renting it for 2 weeks. The hardware store was 11 feet from the cafe's east wall. She straightened up slowly. She was aware of Emma at the counter behind her, drawing something in her sketchbook. The whale, probably, the one she'd been planning, with the important tail. She was aware of the sound of the espresso machine, and the 2 remaining customers, and the ordinary Wednesday light coming through the salt-filmed windows. He's been watching the cafe, she said. Yes. For 2 weeks. Her voice did not go up. It went, if anything, lower. Since before you came back. Before the photograph. Damien was very still. She watched him arrive at the same place she'd just arrived, and she watched him work through what it meant. "It wasn't Carver," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," she said. "If he's been there 2 weeks, that predates whatever problem you described. That's someone who knew you were coming here before you came." She looked at him. "Who knew you were coming to Greyhaven, Damien?" His face had gone completely controlled. The kind of control that is not stillness, but its opposite. The surface appearance of stillness over something that is moving very fast underneath. "My driver," he said. "My head of security." He repeated what he'd told her earlier, and this time the words had a different quality. "And my attorney, who arranged the Harmon Building assessment." "How long has your attorney worked for you?" A muscle moved in his jaw. 14 years. "And your head of security?" 9. "Your driver?" 3 months. He said it before she asked it, and she heard in the 2 words the specific sound of a man who has just understood something that he should have understood much earlier and is not going to waste time on the self-recrimination right now because there isn't time. She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police. Claire, I'm not asking." She held his gaze. "I'm calling the police and telling them there is a man in the apartment above Alderman Hardware who has been conducting surveillance on my cafe and photographing my child. That is what I'm doing. Your world does not get to be the only set of rules that applies here." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped back. "All right. All right," she repeated, and she heard how thin the word was, how much was underneath it. She made the call from the back of the kitchen, standing near the rear door where she'd found the envelope, keeping her voice level while she reported what she knew to the Greyhaven police dispatcher, who was a woman named Donna, who Claire recognized from the farmer's market, and who took the information with the methodical seriousness of someone who understood that small towns were not exempt from large troubles. When she came back out, Emma had stopped drawing and was looking at Damien with her head tilted. "Why do you look like that again?" Emma said. "Like what?" Damien said. "Like the puddle thing." He looked at the small girl for a moment. "Something happened that I'm trying to figure out," he said. I didn't simplify it more than that, which Claire noticed. Emma thought about this. "Does it involve us?" she asked. The word us landed in the cafe like something dropped from a height. Emma said it with the complete unconscious ease of someone who had simply assessed the situation and chosen the accurate pronoun, and Claire watched Damien absorb it and watched something in him shift in a way that was not small and would not shift back. "A little bit," he said, "but I'm going to take care of it." Emma nodded, apparently satisfied, and returned to her wail. The police arrived 17 minutes later. 2 officers, one of whom Claire knew slightly, a young man named Ferris, who'd once come in during a February blizzard and drunk 4 coffees and talked to Mr. Pratt for 2 hours about lobster boat mechanics. They took her statement. They went to the hardware store building. They came back 20 minutes after that with the information that the apartment was empty, cleared out, recently, within the last hour or 2 based on the temperature of a coffee cup left on the kitchen counter. Whoever had been there was gone. They took the envelope. They took the photograph. They filed the report and told her to call if anything else appeared and left with the particular careful helpfulness of people operating at the edges of their jurisdiction, where the thing that has happened is real and serious but has not yet crossed a line that gives them more tools. After they left, the cafe was quiet. The lunch hour had come and gone without her fully registering it. Emma was asleep on the window seat with her coat as a blanket and Mr. Buttons under her chin, the way she sometimes napped in the afternoon when the morning had been too long and too much. Damien was at the counter. He had not left. Claire sat down across the counter from him. She was tired in a way that was below the level of tiredness she usually managed, something that had gotten into the structure of things rather than just the surface. "Your driver," she said. "Marcus." He said the name quietly. "He's 28 years old. He grew up in Bridgeport. I gave him the job because his older brother worked for me for 6 years, and the brother vouched for him." He looked at the counter. "Someone got to him. Someone with more leverage than I gave him the credit to resist. Carver. Or someone above Carver who I haven't identified yet." He was quiet for a moment. "This is what I was trying to tell you. It's not one man. It's not a simple line. I have been very careful for a very long time to build something that operated without this kind of spillover. And something shifted while I was here and I didn't see it moving fast enough." She looked at him. "You have to go back to Chicago." "Yes." And when you do, whoever is watching this cafe is going to know that the pressure worked, that they found the thing that moved you. Yes, he met her eyes, which means I can't leave you here the way things are. She felt the shape of what he was saying settle over the conversation like weather. I'm not leaving Greyhaven. I'm not asking you to. His voice was steady, but she could hear the effort in it, the way a structure sounds when it's carrying more than the original load. But I need to put people here, visible ones, not surveillance, protection. People whose job it is to make sure that the next time someone rents the apartment above the hardware store and starts taking photographs through preschool fences, they run into something more than a police report. Claire looked at her daughter sleeping on the window seat, at the whale sketch half finished on the counter beside her, at Mr. Buttons, whose remaining eye was pointed at the ceiling with the serene indifference of a stuffed animal that has been through a lot and expects more. You said this was supposed to be contained, she said. Your world, my world, separate. I know what I said. You said Emma would never have to know. I know. She looked at him. So what changed? He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost whatever remaining layer it had been using to keep this at a professional distance. I changed, he said. I've been sitting in this cafe for 2 weeks watching you and watching her, and I cannot put it back where it was. In a compartment. In the appropriate place where it doesn't affect my decision-making. He looked at Emma. I told Marcus I was coming to Greyhaven for a building assessment. That's what it was supposed to be. And then I walked in and she was sitting on that stool explaining rabbit ophthalmology to me, and it was... He stopped. His jaw tightened. I should have been more careful. I should have anticipated that my being here would register as a change, and that changes register as vulnerabilities, and that people who have been waiting for a vulnerability would move. That's on me. I own that. Owning it doesn't fix the photograph. No, he said. It doesn't. Emma stirred on the window seat. Didn't wake, just turned, pulling the coat tighter, and made a small sound that was not quite a word. Both of them watched her. In the quiet of the cafe, in the gray October afternoon light, they watched the small person who had somehow become the fixed point around which everything else was now orienting, and Claire felt the specific, terrible clarity of a moment when a decision stops being theoretical. If you put people here, she said quietly, Emma will notice. She notices everything. I know. And I'll have to explain something, eventually. Not yet, he said. Not until she's old enough for it to mean something she can hold. But eventually. Yes. Claire looked at her daughter, at the whale sketch, at the life she had built on the premise that the two worlds could be kept permanently apart, that the fence she'd built around Greyhaven was high enough and solid enough, and that the person who'd told her she was nothing and never to call him again had stayed where she'd put him, in the locked room next to the one that held her love for her sister, the room she'd furnished with 4 years of deliberate forgetting. The fence was gone. She could see the post where it had stood, and in the apartment above Alderman Hardware, there was a coffee cup that was still warm. Damien left at 4 in the afternoon. He didn't make a production of it. He stood up from the counter, put on his coat, and looked at Claire with the specific look of a man who has made a calculation and does not like the answer but trusts the math. 24 hours, he said. I'll be back. You said that before. I mean it differently now. She didn't answer. She watched him go, watched the bell above the door mark his exit, and then she went to the window seat and sat beside Emma and watched the harbor until the light went flat and gray and the fishing boats came in for the evening. That night she locked every door and window in the apartment above the cafe. She checked them twice. She put Emma to bed at 7:30 and sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea that went cold and her phone on the table in front of her, and she waited for something she couldn't name. Nothing came. The night was quiet. Greyhaven in October was always quiet after 9. The season emptied the town of its noise, left only the permanent residents and the sound of the water and the occasional car on the harbor road. She fell asleep in the kitchen chair at midnight and woke at 2 with a stiff neck and Emma's voice calling from the bedroom. Not a nightmare. Emma didn't have nightmares. She'd woken up thirsty. Claire got her water, sat on the edge of the bed while Emma drank it with the serious focus of someone completing an important task. Then Emma handed the cup back and looked at her mother in the dark with her father's dark eyes. Is Damien coming back? She asked. Claire looked at her daughter. Where did that come from? I was thinking about it, Emma said, with the tone of someone for whom this was a fully adequate explanation. Yes, Claire said. He's coming back. Emma nodded, as though this confirmed something she'd already decided, and lay back down and was asleep in 4 minutes. Claire sat there in the dark for a while longer, listening to the water and the wind and the buildings settling around them the way old buildings do, with the creaks and adjustments of something that has been standing a long time and intends to keep standing. She was still awake at 3 when her phone buzzed, a number she didn't recognize. Chicago area code. She stared at it for 2 full rings before she answered. Claire Whitmore. Not a question. A male voice, middle-aged, with the flat vowels of the Midwest and something underneath the flatness that she recognized immediately as the specific register of a man who was accustomed to being obeyed. Who is this? She said. My name isn't important. What's important is that you understand that Damian Blackwood is making decisions right now that are going to have consequences for a number of people, and that you are one of the reasons he's making those decisions, and that I'd like you to understand the full picture before anything irreversible happens. She was on her feet without deciding to stand. She moved to the kitchen, away from Emma's door, keeping her voice low. How did you get this number? The same way I get everything. A pause. I'm not your enemy, Miss Whitmore. I want you to understand that. I'm a businessman. I have interests. Damian Blackwood has spent 9 years being very useful to those interests, and now he's distracted, and distraction is expensive. Is this Carver? A short silence. Carver works for me, the man said. Carver is a tool. Tools don't make calls like this. She pressed her back against the kitchen wall. Her heart was doing something loud and fast in her chest, but her voice stayed level because she made it stay level, because Ford had given her a specific kind of muscle. What do you want? I want Damian back in Chicago, fully present, running his operation the way he's been running it for 9 years. That's all I want. And I want you to understand that what happens to the people around him is a direct function of how cooperative he is. You're threatening my daughter. I'm explaining a situation, the man said. A photograph is an explanation. A photograph means we see you. It means we have the capability. It doesn't mean we intend to use it. Another pause. But capability and intent are separated by a very thin line, Ms. Whitmore, thinner than most people realize until they've been close to it. She stood in her kitchen in the dark with the phone against her ear and looked at the rear door, the door where the envelope had been, the door that opened onto the service alley. And she thought about capability and intent and the specific fine-grained nature of the line between them. I'm going to hang up now, she said. That's your right. His voice didn't change. Tell Damian that Raymond sends his regards. He'll understand what that means. The line went dead. She stood for a moment with the phone in her hand. Then she pulled up Damian's number and called it. He answered before the second ring, which told her he hadn't been sleeping either. Someone named Raymond just called me, she said. 3 seconds of silence, the quality of which told her everything. Say that again, he said. Raymond. He said you'd know what it means. He talked about capability and intent, and he said you were distracted and that distraction is expensive. She kept her voice absolutely flat. He called my personal phone, Damian. My personal phone that 3 people have. She heard him breathing. She heard something shift in the background, switch, movement, a door, the specific sound of a man who has been sitting in a dark room doing triage and has just received information that changes the entire map. Where are you right now? He said. My kitchen. Don't open the back door. Don't open any doors until I call you back. His voice had changed into something she had never heard from him directly, but had always known was there. The part of him that ran in emergencies the way other men ran from them. The cold operational core that made him the thing he was. 20 minutes. He hung up. She put the phone in her pocket and stood in the kitchen and did not open any doors. He called back in 18 minutes. I need you to pack a bag for you and Emma. Enough for 3 days. Do it quietly. My men will be at your back door in 10 minutes. Not the alley entrance, the fire escape side. Knock pattern is 3, pause, 2. Don't open for anything else. Damian, Raymond Shea has been running the Eastern supply chain for 11 years. He and I have an arrangement that has been mutually beneficial, and he has never, in 11 years, made a move that personal. His voice was stripped of everything except information. Which means he's scared. Scared men who have money and resources do not become less dangerous. They become more unpredictable. I need you and Emma somewhere I can account for until I deal with this. Deal with it how? I'm going to go talk to him. The simplicity of it hit her sideways. You're going to go talk to the man who just threatened my child. Yes, that's your plan. Raymond Shea does not want open conflict. Open conflict is expensive and visible, and he has built his entire operation on invisibility. The call he made tonight was a pressure tactic. It means his other pressure tactics haven't worked, which means he's reached the end of his comfortable options. She could hear him moving as he talked, the sound of a man preparing something while speaking. If I go to him directly, on his ground, alone, it resets the dynamic. It says I'm not running and I'm not distracted. It says I'm still the man he made his arrangement with. And if you're wrong about what he wants, a pause. Then I'm wrong. She stood in the kitchen with the phone and the cold and the sound of Emma breathing in the next room, and she understood, with complete clarity, that she was standing at the specific point where two worlds that she had tried very hard to keep separate had become one world, and the fence posts were all that was left. She packed the bags. She did it the way she did hard things, quickly, methodically, without letting herself think too far ahead of the task at hand. 3 days of clothes for Emma. Emma's medications. The antihistamine she took in fall for her seasonal allergies. The vitamin D that the pediatrician had recommended. Mr. Buttons. Emma would not go anywhere overnight without Mr. Buttons, and Claire was not going to test that boundary tonight of all nights. Her own bag. Her documents. Emma's birth certificate, her passport, both of their social security cards that she kept in a fireproof box under the bathroom sink. The knock came at the fire escape window at 3:47. 3. Pause. 2. She opened it to a man she didn't recognize, broad, somewhere in his 40s, with the specific build of someone who had been physical his whole life and was now carrying the accumulated density of it. He looked at her once, assessed, and said quietly, "Ms. Whitmore, I'm Kane. Damien sent me." "I know," she said. "Give me 2 minutes." She went into Emma's room and sat on the edge of the bed and put her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Hey, Bug, we're going on a trip." Emma opened her eyes. She had always been able to go from fully asleep to fully present with a speed that Claire had found alarming when she was an infant and had come to rely on as Emma got older. She looked at her mother. She looked at the bag in the doorway. She looked at the dark outside the window. "Now?" she said. "Now." Emma sat up. She reached for Mr. Buttons. She looked at her mother's face with the same complete, unguarded attentiveness she brought to reading Damien's expression across a cafe counter. "Is it the thing that's been happening?" she said. Claire looked at her daughter, at 4 years old, asking that question. "Yes," she said. "But we're okay. We're going somewhere safe, and then it's going to be okay." Emma absorbed this. Then she climbed out of bed and put on her shoes, wrong feet, both of them, in the dark, and picked up Mr. Buttons and walked to the door with the straightforward courage of someone who has been told something true and has decided to trust it. They left through the fire escape. Kane had a car waiting in the narrow street behind the hardware store, which was a detail that registered darkly and then passed because there wasn't time to sit with it. A second man was in the driver's seat, younger, quieter. He didn't introduce himself. He drove. Emma sat in the back between Claire and the window with Mr. Buttons in her lap and looked out at the dark harbor road and said nothing for 4 minutes, which was the longest Claire could recall her going without speaking in recent memory. Then she said, "Where's Damien?" "He's handling something," Claire said. "Is he okay?" Claire looked at her daughter's profile against the dark window. "He's going to be," she said. They drove to a house on the north side of the peninsula, 20 minutes from the cafe, a rental property that sat above a rock beach and smelled like salt and old wood and the specific mustiness of a place that was closed up most of the year. Kane opened it with a key and turned on the lights and showed Claire where everything was, with the efficient brevity of a man who understood that the situation required function over comfort. Emma walked through the small house with Mr. Buttons under her arm, examining everything with the systematic thoroughness of someone taking inventory, and then she came back to the kitchen where Claire was standing at the counter trying to decide if she could make tea from what was in the cabinets. "It smells like fish," Emma said. "It does," Claire agreed. "Is that because of the ocean?" "Probably." Emma considered this acceptable and climbed onto a kitchen chair and sat with her rabbit in her wrong-footed shoes and watched her mother find a box of chamomile tea that had probably been there since before Emma was born. Kane positioned himself near the front door. He wasn't aggressive about it. He sat in a chair with his back to the wall and his phone in his hand and gave every appearance of someone who could wait indefinitely. Claire found she was grateful for the particular shape of his presence, the way it occupied space without demanding anything from it. At 5:15, her phone rang. Damien. She took it to the back bedroom. "Are you all right?" she said, before he could speak. "I'm in Chicago," he said. "Just landed. I need you to listen." "I'm listening." "Raymond agreed to meet. Tonight, 11 o'clock his time. That's 6 hours from now." His voice was stripped down, traveling fast. "I want you to know that I have 3 people who know exactly where I'm going and exactly what the meeting parameters are, and if I don't check in every 90 minutes, those 3 people have instructions." He paused. "I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm telling you because you deserve to know what the actual situation is." "I know what the actual situation is," she said. "The actual situation is that a man called my phone at 3 in the morning to tell me my daughter is visible to people who don't care about the same things I care about, and that the reason she's visible is standing in front of Raymond Shea right now." Silence on the line. "Yes," he said. "That's the actual situation. Fix it," she said. "Whatever it takes, fix it." "I will." She hung up and went back to the kitchen and drank bad chamomile tea and watched Emma fall back asleep on the couch under a blanket she'd found in a cedar chest, Mr. Buttons chin deep in the fabric, and waited. The morning came in gray and cold off the water. Kane produced eggs from somewhere, she didn't ask, and made scrambled eggs on the small stove with the focused competence of a man who understood that people in stressful situations needed to eat, and that this was a form of service as valid as any other. Emma ate her eggs and looked at Kane with the evaluative tilt of her head. "Do you work for Damien?" she asked. Kane looked at Claire. Claire gave him nothing. "I work for your family," Kane said after a moment. Emma considered this. "That's a different answer than yes," she said. "It's a more accurate answer," Kane said. Emma looked at him a moment longer and then apparently decided he was trustworthy based on whatever internal criteria she was applying and finished her eggs. At 9:40, Damien called. He had met with Raymond Shea in a restaurant in the West Loop at 11 the previous night, a place that Shea owned under a holding company and used for meetings that required privacy and the implicit communication of home turf. Damien had gone alone, which was the point, which communicated what he needed to communicate before a word was spoken. He had sat across from Shea, and the 2 men had talked for 2 hours and 40 minutes. "What was said?" Claire asked. She was standing at the back door of the rented house, looking at the rock beach below, the gray water doing its gray October thing. What needed to be said? His voice was different from the night before. Not lighter, exactly, but settled, like something had been resolved to a state that could be worked with. Raymond's concern was never about Emma. I want you to understand that. His concern was about the stability of an arrangement, and his read, incorrect but not irrational, that my being in Greyhaven represented a distraction that would cascade into operational problems. And you convinced him otherwise. I convinced him that his approach to the problem was creating the exact instability he was trying to prevent. A pause. I also made clear that any further contact with you or Emma would be treated as a declaration rather than a communication, and that declarations have consequences he is not currently positioned to absorb. Claire stood on the back step of the fish-smelling house with the wind coming off the water and the sound of Emma inside explaining something to Kane. "Did he believe you?" "He's a practical man," Damien said. "He believes in cost-benefit. The cost of continuing to apply pressure to my personal life is now higher than the benefit. That's how these things work. And Marcus, your driver. Marcus is being handled separately." His voice went flat on those 4 words in a way that she didn't ask him to clarify. "Damien." She watched a gull work the wind above the water. "What did you give him?" "Raymond, what did you give him to make it cost-benefit?" A pause that was 1 beat too long. "I committed to returning to full operation," he said. "Chicago-based, present, actively managing the Eastern relationships that have been drifting since I've been in Greyhaven." She closed her eyes, opened them. The water was still gray. The gull was still there. So you're going back? I said I would be in Greyhaven every weekend. I said my personal life was not subject to negotiation or modification by any person inside or outside the organization. I said that explicitly, on his ground, which is not something that happens in that world, ever. Another pause. He accepted it. Because he had to. Because I made it so that he had to. She could hear him exhale slowly. Claire, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it the way it's meant, not the way it's going to sound. Say it. Last night, sitting across from Raymond Shea, a man I've known for 11 years, a man I've done things with that I'm not going to describe, I was not thinking about the organization. I was not thinking about the Eastern Corridor or Marcus or Carver or any of it. I was thinking about Emma in that house on the peninsula asking Kane if he works for Damien and the answer he gave her. His voice was quiet now, stripped of the operational layer completely. I've been building something for 20 years, and sitting in that restaurant, it felt like I was looking at it from outside, and it was nothing. It was machinery. And I have a daughter who thinks the most important quality of a one-eyed rabbit is that he hasn't bumped into anything. She stood on the back step and held the phone and let the wind come off the water and didn't say anything for a moment. Come back, she said finally. I'll be there tonight. He arrived at 7:15. Emma was awake. She'd napped in the afternoon and woken up fully charged, as she always did, with the rested energy of someone who treated sleep as a renewable resource rather than a retreat. She heard the car on the gravel drive and went to the window and then turned to Claire with her face doing something complicated. He looks tired, she announced. Claire looked out the window. Damien was getting out of the car. Different car, rental, navy blue. He was wearing the same coat. He looked the way people look after a night of high-stakes negotiation followed by a flight at dawn, compressed, wrung, still standing through the specific stubbornness of someone who has decided that falling is not an acceptable option right now. Emma went to the door before Claire could intercept her. She pulled it open and stood in the doorway with Mr. Buttons under her arm and looked at Damien coming up the porch steps and said, "You look really tired." "I am really tired," he said. "Did you eat?" "On the plane." Emma assessed this. "Plain food is bad," she said, with the authority of someone who had eaten plain food exactly once, on a trip to see a specialist in Boston when she was 3, and had not forgotten it. "It is," he agreed. He came inside. He looked at Claire over Emma's head. She looked back. There was a conversation in it that would take weeks to finish, maybe longer, but the first line of it was there, visible, in the specific way he was holding himself, the slight forward lean of someone who has come back to something rather than returning from it. Kane left. The other man left. The house became the three of them, and the sound of the water, and Emma, who had decided that what Damien needed was to sit on the couch and hear about the whale drawing she'd been working on, which was now much more detailed, with the tale in particular getting significant attention. He sat on the couch. He listened to Emma explain the whale with the complete attention of a man who has reorganized his priorities and is applying them in real time. Claire made actual food from what was in the cabinets: pasta, a jar of sauce that was fine, bread that was slightly stale but acceptable, and set it on the small table and called them both. They ate. Emma dominated the conversation, which was normal. She wanted to know if Damien had ever seen a real whale. He said he hadn't. She told him this was a serious gap that needed addressing. He agreed. She told him that Greyhaven had whale watching in the spring, and that sometimes you could see them from the rocks below the lighthouse if you went at the right time. "Have you been?" he asked. "Mom took me last April," Emma said. "We saw 3. One was a baby." She considered. It wasn't actually small. It was still huge. But it was a baby. How could you tell? Because it was next to its mom, and they looked the same, except one was way bigger. Emma said this as though it were self-evident, which to her it clearly was, and went back to her pasta. Damien looked at Claire across the table. She looked back. His face had the look of a man sitting in a moment that he is trying very hard to be present in, because he understands, at a level below language, that these moments are not unlimited. After dinner, Emma crashed fast. The strange place, the disrupted night, the accumulated weight of a day that had been a lot even for a 4-year-old operating on resilience and curiosity. Claire put her to bed on the couch with the blanket from the cedar chest and stayed with her until her breathing slowed and her face went smooth and Mr. Buttons was firmly under her chin. She came back to the kitchen. Damien was at the table with a cup of coffee. He'd found the coffee, which was a better discovery than the chamomile. She sat down across from him. "How bad is it?" she said. "Honestly." "Raymond is contained," he said. "The organization is not destabilized. Carver will be dealt with inside normal channels." He looked at the mug. "Honest answer. I've spent 2 weeks in Greyhaven, and the things I set in motion here, personally, not professionally, moved faster than I managed them. That's a failure of attention I own completely." "I need to know if it happens again," she said. "If someone like Raymond decides that his arrangement is more important than my daughter's safety, I need to know immediately, not after you've managed it, before." "Yes." "That's a real yes, not a management yes." He looked at her directly. "It's a real yes." She nodded. Outside, the water was doing its night thing. She could hear it against the rocks, irregular, the sound of something large and patient working at the edges of things. "She asked me if you were coming back," Claire said. "Last night, Emma, before we left." She wrapped both hands around her own mug. 3 in the morning, half asleep, and the first thing she asked about was you. Damien's jaw worked. He looked down at the coffee. "She doesn't know what you are," Claire said. "She knows you drink your coffee black and you think her rabbit's good, and you look like the puddle face when something's happened. That's all she knows." She looked at him. "But she asked if you were coming back. So I need to know what that means. What you're actually offering, not the feeling of it, the structure of it. What it looks like when it's Tuesday and something has happened in Chicago and Emma has preschool at 8 and I need to know if you're going to answer the phone." "I answer the phone," he said. "Every time." "Every time?" She looked at him for a long moment. The house settled around them. The water worked at the rocks. "There are things about your world that I will never accept," she said. "Things I will never pretend are fine. Things I will not allow Emma to normalize." She held his gaze. "And there are things I can work with. And I don't know yet exactly where the line is. But I know that you went to Chicago alone and you came back and Emma is asleep in the next room under a blanket that smells like cedar and she asked about you at 3 in the morning." She exhaled slowly. "That's where we are." He nodded. He didn't push past it, didn't try to claim more than she'd offered. "Okay," he said. "We're going home tomorrow," she said. "Back to the cafe. Back to regular." "I'll follow you back," he said. "You don't have to." "I know." He looked at her. "I want to." She stood up. She was tired in a way that had gone all the way to the bottom. "There's a second bedroom," she said. "Kane left sheets." "I'll find it," he said. She went to the door of the kitchen and stopped. She stood for a moment with her hand on the doorframe and her back to him, and the sound of Emma breathing in the next room and the water outside, and the specific weight of everything that had happened in the last 72 hours stacked up in her chest, like something that was going to take a long time to sort through. "Damien," she said. "Yeah." "If you tell her never to contact you again." She stopped. She didn't finish it. She didn't need to. I was quiet for a moment. "I won't," he said. She went to bed. She lay in the dark of the second bedroom with the salt smell and the sound of the water, and she thought about Raymond Shea and Marcus and the envelope under the back door and the coffee cup and the empty apartment that had still been warm, and she thought about Emma explaining whale sizes at dinner with the complete authority of someone who had assessed the evidence and reached a logical conclusion, and she thought about Damien sitting on Raymond Shea's ground and saying that his personal life was not subject to negotiation by anyone, which was the most dangerous and the most real thing he had done in the time she'd known him. She thought about the locked rooms, the one for Olivia, the one for Damien, the years she'd spent maintaining the locks with the diligence of someone who understood that what lived behind them was still alive and still had weight. She thought about Emma's shoes, always on the wrong feet, and how she had stopped correcting it because Emma clearly knew which feet were hers and had simply decided that the categories were negotiable. She fell asleep with the water coming up against the rocks below, and the wind moving through the eaves and the low, even sound of the house settling around the three of them. And in the morning, the light came in off the water and hit the ceiling of the bedroom in a long, pale stripe. And somewhere in the house, a 4-year-old woke up and said, loudly and without preamble, that she was ready for breakfast and also that she had thought of a better whale. They drove back to Greyhaven in the morning. Emma sat in the back of Claire's car with Mr. Buttons and the whale drawing she'd finished at the kitchen table, while Damien drank his second coffee and watched her work with the focused attention of someone who has decided that watching is the most important thing they can do. The drawing was better than Claire expected. Emma had an instinct for proportion that surprised her sometimes, the way children surprised you by quietly developing competencies you hadn't thought to cultivate. The whale was large and dark, and the tail was exactly as she'd described it, significant. Damien followed in the rental car. Claire watched him in the rearview mirror on the harbor road and thought about all the ways a person could follow someone, the ways that were about control, and the ways that were about something else entirely, and decided she didn't have the energy to interrogate the distinction right now. The morning was pale and cold. The water was doing what it did. The town appeared around the bend the way it always did, low and gray and salt-worn and completely itself, and something in Claire's chest eased slightly at the sight of it, the way it always did, which was the specific feeling of a place that had become home without her fully authorizing the transaction. She parked behind this cafe. She unlocked the back door, the door where the envelope had been, and stood in the threshold for a moment with the key in her hand and the cold at her back, and then she went inside and turned the lights on and started the espresso machine. By 9 o'clock, it was a regular morning, or close enough. Mr. Pratt came in for his toast and his plain coffee and didn't notice anything different because Mr. Pratt had the magnificent self-containment of a 78-year-old man who had seen enough of the world's variations to find most of them unremarkable. Emma was on her stool with her orange juice. Damien was at the window table. The library women came in at 9:30 and sat in the corner and talked about something with the low intensity of people discussing either literature or local politics, which in Greyhaven often amounted to the same conversation. The ordinary shape of the morning held. Claire moved through it with the practiced efficiency of 3 years and felt, underneath the efficiency, a kind of fragile gratitude for the fact that the ordinary shape had survived the last 72 hours intact. At 10, when the cafe had settled into its mid-morning quiet, Damien came to the counter. "I need to go back to Chicago on Thursday," he said. "I know," she said. "I'll be back Friday evening." She looked at him. "Every weekend." "Every weekend." He said it without hedging, without the lawyerly qualifications she'd learned to listen for in the spaces between his words. Just that. Every weekend. She nodded and went back to wiping down the counter, and he went back to his window table, and Emma watched this exchange with the alert attentiveness of someone tracking the weather. Thursday came. He left. He called when he landed, boom, which she hadn't asked him to do, which he did anyway. He texted Friday morning, on the road at 4, there by 9. He was there by 8:40, which meant he'd driven faster than he should have, which she decided not to address because some arguments were not worth the energy they cost. Emma heard the car on the street and went to the window without being told, and then turned around with a look on her face that was trying very hard to be casual and completely failing. "He's here," she announced, to no one in particular, in the tone of someone reporting a weather development. "I see that," Claire said. He came in with a paper bag that turned out to contain a ceramic rabbit. Not a stuffed one, actual ceramic, small, with a slightly uneven glaze that suggested it had been made by a person rather than a machine, and with 2 eyes. 2 complete, present, fully operational eyes. Emma took it from him with both hands and held it up and examined it with the forensic attention she brought to things she cared about. "He has 2 eyes," she said. "He does," Damien said. "Mr. Buttons only has 1. "I know." Emma looked between the ceramic rabbit and Mr. Buttons, who was on the counter. She looked at Damien. "Did you make this?" "I found it," he said. "At a place in Chicago. Someone makes them." "How did you know I'd like it?" He looked at her. "I didn't know for certain," he said. "I thought you might." Emma considered this for a long moment, turning the rabbit in her hands, and then she set it carefully on the counter next to Mr. Buttons and stepped back and looked at the 2 of them together with the expression of someone assessing a curatorial decision. "They can be friends," she said. "Mr. Buttons can teach him things." "What kinds of things?" Damien said. "How to be okay with stuff," Emma said, simply, and climbed back onto her stool with the completeness of someone who has settled a matter and is ready to move on. Claire had her back turned at the coffee machine. She stayed facing the machine for a moment longer than necessary. The weeks that followed built themselves the way weeks do when the acute emergency has passed, and what remains is the slower, harder work of figuring out what you're actually doing. Damien came every weekend. Sometimes he arrived Friday, sometimes Saturday morning, depending on what the week had required. He always called ahead. He always came to the cafe first, which she understood was a deliberate choice. Neutral ground, public space, the place that was unambiguously hers, where she had all the structural authority and he had only what she allowed him. He started coming to Emma's preschool pickup on Saturdays. The first time, he stood at the fence, the same chain-link fence where the photograph had been taken, which was either obliviousness or a specific act of reclamation, she couldn't decide which, and waited with the other parents and grandparents with his hands in his coat pockets and his city shoes slightly wrong for the gravel parking lot. Emma came out of the building and saw him and broke into the specific run of a 4-year-old who is not trying to run, who would in fact deny running if you mentioned it, but whose legs have made an autonomous decision. She didn't jump on him. She walked the last 3 feet and stopped and looked up at him and said, "You came." "I said I would," he said. Emma nodded. This was apparently sufficient. She took his hand, just reached up and took it with the uncomplicated practicality of someone who has assessed the distance to the car and made a logical transportation decision, and walked him to the parking lot where Claire was waiting. Claire watched her daughter holding Damien Blackwood's hand in the preschool parking lot with the specific sensation of someone watching something they had braced against for a long time finally happen and discovering that the bracing had been both necessary and somehow beside the point. In November, Olivia called. Not the fraught crying call of 2 years ago. A different call, shorter, more careful, with the particular quality of someone who has done a lot of thinking and has arrived at a place that is less about what she needs and more about what she owes. "I want to meet Emma," she said. "If that's something you'd ever—" "I'm not asking for now. I know now isn't right. I just want you to know that it's something I want when you think she's ready, if you ever think she's ready." Claire sat with the phone at the kitchen table after Emma had gone to sleep. The ceramic rabbit and Mr. Buttons were both on the windowsill, where Emma had installed them 3 weeks ago. 2 eyes and 1 eye, looking out at the harbor lights. "She's going to ask questions," Claire said, "when she's old enough to ask them." "I know," Olivia said, "about everything. About why you weren't there, about what happened, about all of it. I know. And the answer can't be a version that protects any of us," Claire said, "including me. She deserves the actual thing, at the right age, in the right pieces." "Yes," Olivia said. "I know that." Claire looked at the windowsill, at the 2 rabbits. "Come for Christmas," she said. "Just you. We'll see how it goes." Olivia made a sound on the phone that was brief and controlled and very full. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," Claire said. "Come and we'll see." She called Damien after she hung up with Olivia. She told him she'd invited Olivia for Christmas. He was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel about that?" he said. "I don't know yet," she said. "I'm trying to decide if I invited her because I wanted to or because it was the right thing to do, and I'm not sure those are different things anymore." "They're not always," he said. "No." She looked out the kitchen window at the dark harbor. "Are you coming for Christmas?" A pause, shorter than she expected. "If you want me to." She thought about it honestly, without managing the answer toward what sounded reasonable. "Yes," she said. "I want you to." He was quiet again for a moment, and in the silence she could hear something settle in him. Not relief, exactly, something more complicated than relief. Something that had been waiting for a door to open that it hadn't been sure would. "I'll be there the 23rd, he said. In December, on a Wednesday morning when the cafe was quiet, and the first real snow of the season was coming down in the specific unhurried way that Greyhaven snow fell, as though it had all the time in the world and knew it, the custody lawyer called. His name was Aldrich, and he was the 3rd lawyer Claire had spoken with, the first 2 having struck her as either too aggressive or too passive in ways that suggested they were solving for the wrong thing. Aldrich was a family attorney from Portland who had been recommended by a woman in Claire's Tuesday morning coffee group who had gone through a custody arrangement 3 years ago and described Aldrich as someone who understood that the child was the point. She took the call in the back kitchen. Damien had agreed to the framework weeks ago. She'd sent him the initial documents through Aldrich, and he'd had his own attorney review them and had sent back 3 minor modifications, all of which were about logistics rather than substance, and which Aldrich had described as the most professionally reasonable response he'd received from the opposing party in 11 years. "We're ready to file," Aldrich said. "Do you want to review the final language one more time?" "Yes," she said. "Send it tonight." She reviewed it that evening after Emma was asleep. She sat at the kitchen table with the document on her laptop and a cup of tea and read every line with the attention of someone who understood that language was load-bearing. The arrangement gave Damien legal parental rights and formal visitation every weekend, alternating holidays, 2 weeks in summer, with the explicit provision that any changes to the schedule required 48 hours notice except in genuine emergencies, and with a clause that she'd asked Aldrich to include that she'd expected him to push back on, and that he'd included without comment, that Emma's primary residence was Greyhaven, that the cafe was her home, that no relocation would occur without mutual agreement and court approval. She read that clause 3 times. Then she signed the document electronically and sent it back to Aldrich and closed the laptop and sat in the quiet kitchen with the snow coming down outside and the harbor lights making blurred shapes through the window glass. The day before Christmas Eve, Damien arrived at noon. He pulled into the lot behind the cafe in a car she didn't recognize, different from the rental, something that had the specific plainness of a vehicle chosen not to stand out, and came in through the back door with 2 bags and a small evergreen wreath that he hung on the interior door handle without asking, which was either presumptuous or exactly right, and she decided to leave the wreath where it was. Emma was in the cafe when he arrived, at her stool, working on a drawing that was more ambitious than the whale, something with multiple figures, people maybe, though the arms were still at the exploratory stage of their development. She looked up when he came in and said, "You brought a lot of stuff." "I'm staying a few days," he said. "How many?" "Through New Year's." Emma absorbed this. Something moved across her face, quick, controlled for a 4-year-old, which meant it was not controlled at all, but was rather moving through her with the transparency of someone who has not yet learned to curate their reactions. She looked back down at her drawing. "Okay," she said, with extreme casualness. Damien set his bags down. He looked at Claire, who was at the coffee machine. She looked back. Something passed between them that was not a conversation and was not nothing. "The second bedroom's made up," she said. "Thanks," he said. He put his things in the second bedroom and came back and sat at the window table and drank his coffee and answered emails on his phone with the focused quiet of someone who is very good at keeping 2 things separate. Claire ran the lunch service. Emma drew. The snow came down. Olivia arrived on Christmas Eve at 3 in the afternoon, driving a car that was practical and slightly dented on the rear quarter panel, which told Claire something about the life her sister had been building in the in-between years. She stood on the cafe's front step for a moment before she knocked. Claire saw her through the window, standing with her hands in her coat pockets and her face doing the work of someone who is trying to arrive at the right version of themselves before a door opens. Claire opened the door. They looked at each other. Olivia was thinner than she'd been, but she had a settled quality she hadn't had before, something that lived in the way she held her shoulders. She'd cut her hair. She looked like a person who had been through something and had decided to let it show. "Hi," Olivia said. "Hi," Claire said. They stood there for a moment, the cold coming in off the street, and then Claire stepped back and Olivia came inside, and that was that. They didn't hug immediately. That came later, after the coats and the tea, and the careful first 20 minutes of conversation that was partly about Olivia's drive and partly about the snow, and not at all about any of the things that mattered, which was its own necessary ritual, the way you let a cold room warm up before you expect it to hold heat. Emma came downstairs at 4. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at Olivia with her head tilted, and Claire watched her daughter look at her sister, and she saw the moment when Emma noticed the resemblance, the slight widening of her eyes, the quick comparison she was running without knowing she was running it. "You look like my mom," Emma said. Olivia's face did something that she managed to hold together through sheer force of will. "She's my sister," Olivia said. Emma looked at Claire. "You have a sister?" "I do," Claire said. "How come I didn't know?" "Because we were out of touch for a while," Claire said, "and now we're back in touch." Emma processed this with the pragmatic efficiency of someone for whom the logistics of adult relationships were interesting data rather than distressing revelations. Okay, she said. I don't have a sister. I have Mr. Buttons. She looked at Olivia. And a ceramic rabbit. His name is Rabbit. You named him Rabbit? Olivia said. He already knew what he was, Emma said. I didn't want to confuse him. Olivia laughed. A real laugh, surprised out of her, and Claire heard in it the laugh she recognized from before everything, from the sister she'd known when they were young and the world was smaller and the damage was still ahead of them. Damien came in from the back of the cafe at 5. He and Olivia had not been in the same room since the morning 4 years ago that had ended everything, and Claire had thought about this moment with the specific dread of someone who knows a thing is necessary but cannot fully visualize its shape. They stood at opposite ends of the kitchen. Olivia's jaw was tight. Damien's face was completely controlled, which was its own kind of information. Olivia, he said. Damien, she said. Emma was between them, at the kitchen table, explaining something to Mr. Buttons. She was the reason the room held. Claire understood this with a clarity that had nothing abstract about it. Emma's presence was not symbolic, was not metaphorical, was purely and practically the reason both of these people were behaving like adults who understood what the moment required of them. I'll take Emma upstairs, Claire said. You two can… It's fine, Olivia said. She looked at Damien. It was a long time ago, and I've spent all of it knowing what I did. I'm not going to pretend I don't know it in front of you. She held his gaze. I'm here for Claire, and for Emma. Not to manage anything between you and me. Damien nodded, once. All right, he said. All right, Olivia said. Emma looked up from Mr. Buttons. Are you arguing? No, 3 adults said simultaneously. Emma looked at each of them in turn. Okay, she said, apparently satisfied, and went back to her rabbit. Christmas Eve was, improbably, ordinary. Claire cooked. A real meal, the kind she didn't make often because cooking for one adult and a 4-year-old didn't justify the effort, but which she made now because there were people at the table and the table should be used for what it was for. Roast chicken, potatoes. Something with squash that Emma ate with surprising enthusiasm and then wanted more of, which felt like an endorsement. Olivia set the table. Damien found the wine that Claire had forgotten she had, on the back of the pantry shelf, and opened it without asking, which was again either presumptuous or exactly right, and she poured herself a glass without comment. They ate. Emma was voluble and specific and moved the conversation wherever she wanted it to go, which turned out to include the whale and its completed portrait, the ceramic rabbit's philosophical contentment with being named Rabbit, a detailed account of something that had happened at preschool involving a boy named Theo who had eaten paste and the subsequent moral and practical questions this raised, and her current theory about why snow was white, which was involved and internally consistent and almost entirely wrong. The adults let her lead. They followed the conversation where she took it, and in the following they found the particular relief of people who have been given an excuse not to talk directly about the hard things for a few hours, which was its own form of grace. After dinner, after Emma was in bed, she'd fallen asleep mid-sentence, which was her style, going out like a light switched off. The 3 adults sat in the cafe's main room with the lights low and the snow still coming down outside and the harbor lights making their blurred shapes in the window. Olivia held her wine glass with both hands. She looked at the table. Then she looked at Claire. I've thought about what to say 1,000 times, she said. I've practiced it, written it out. She shook her head. It all sounds like a prepared statement. Then don't prepare it, Claire said. Olivia looked at her. I'm sorry, she said. Not for the way you feel, not for the situation, for what I did. Specifically. I chose myself over you, and I told myself it was more complicated than that, and it wasn't. Her voice was steady. It had cost her something to make it steady, and the cost showed. You were my sister. You were the person who drove me to the hospital when I broke my wrist in 9th grade and didn't tell Mom for 3 hours because I didn't want her to be upset. You were the person who… She stopped, started again. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I did it anyway. The cafe was quiet. Somewhere in the harbor a boat moved, its light making a slow arc across the window. I know, Claire said. I don't know what I was, Olivia said. Jealous. stupid, young in a way that excuses nothing. She looked at Damien briefly, then back at Claire. I've spent 4 years trying to figure out who to be angry at, and I kept coming back to myself, and that was correct. Damien was quiet. He'd been quiet for most of dinner, too, in the way of someone who understands that some conversations don't need him, that his role in certain rooms is to be present and accountable and not take up more space than the moment requires. I'm not going to tell you it's forgotten, Claire said. It isn't. It won't be. She looked at her sister. But it's not what I wake up thinking about anymore. It was, for a long time. It's not now. She held Olivia's gaze. Emma is going to need to know you. She's going to need people in her life who have history, who go back. She's going to need family that isn't just me. She paused. I'm not doing this because I've decided everything is fine. I'm doing it because Emma is more important than the thing between us. Olivia nodded. She pressed her lips together. That's enough, she said. That's more than I expected. It's what I have right now, Claire said. The rest we build. Olivia nodded again, and this time she didn't try to hold it together, and Claire watched her sister cry with the particular complicated feeling of someone who has loved a person for 30 years through every version of them, including the versions that were hard to love, and who finds that the love is still there, altered and weathered, and not what it was, but present. She reached across the table and put her hand over Olivia's. Neither of them said anything. Damien looked at the window. The snow came down. The harbor light moved. Later, after Olivia had gone to the guest room and the cafe was quiet and the wine glasses were in the sink, Claire stood at the front window looking at the street. The snow had stopped. The town was still in the specific way that towns become still after snow, as though the accumulation has muffled the world's ordinary noise and what remains is something closer to the baseline. She heard Damien come up behind her, not touching, just present, a few feet back. She could see his reflection in the dark glass of the window. 4 years ago, she said, not turning around, I stood in an airport and I had a ticket to Boston and a positive test and a suitcase, and I couldn't find a single reason to do anything except get on the plane and go. He didn't speak. He let her have the space the sentence needed. I was terrified, she said, not of being a mother, of being alone with it, of having loved someone so much that I'd made a person out of it, and having that person turn around and tell me I didn't exist. She watched her own reflection in the window. I got on the plane. I went to Portland. I worked double shifts at a diner for 8 months. And I found this town, and I found this building, and I made something. She was quiet for a moment. I was so angry for so long that I made it into fuel. I built the cafe on it. And then at some point, I couldn't tell you exactly when, the anger stopped being fuel, and it was just weight. And I've been carrying it since then because I didn't know how to put it down. She turned around. He was standing in the middle of the cafe, hands at his sides, in the low light of the winter night, and he looked like what he was. A man who had done many things he couldn't undo, who was standing in the room anyway, who had decided that standing in the room was the only honest option left. You don't have to carry it for me anymore, he said. His voice was quiet. Not asking for anything, not negotiating, just stating a thing. I'm not asking you to hand it to me. I'm saying you can put it down. She looked at him. It's not that simple. I know. Knowing someone has changed isn't the same as trusting them. I know that too. And trust is not something I have to offer you right now, she said. What I have is this, what you're already in, weekend by weekend, whatever this is. That's something, he said. It's what I can do. He nodded. He wasn't pushing past it. She understood now that this was one of the things that had changed in him. The understanding that some things couldn't be moved faster, that trying to move them faster broke them entirely, that the only way through was through, one weekend at a time, one morning at a time, one instance of answering the phone. She crossed the cafe. She stopped in front of him. She looked at his face, which she had spent 4 years trying to stop seeing clearly and had failed at completely, and she said, "You hurt me badly." "Yes," he said, "and I took 4 years of Emma's life and put them somewhere you couldn't reach, and that was also damage." "Yes," he said, "so we're both carrying things." "We are." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the street was white and still. Somewhere upstairs, Emma was sleeping with Mr. Buttons and the ceramic rabbit, 2 eyes and 1 eye on the windowsill, looking at the harbor. She reached up and put her hand against the side of his face. Just that. Palm against jaw, thumb against the edge of his cheekbone. He went very still. He didn't move toward her. He understood, she thought, that this was not an invitation so much as an accounting. Her hand on his face saying, I know what you are, and I know what this is, and I'm choosing to be here anyway. And that choosing is mine. It belongs to me. And you don't get to rush it, or assume it, or turn it into something it isn't yet. She took her hand back. Good night, she said. Good night, he said. She went upstairs. She checked on Emma, still asleep, her breathing even, her face smooth. Mr. Buttons firmly in position, and the ceramic rabbit on the windowsill catching the harbor light on its two complete eyes. She stood in the doorway for a moment and watched her daughter sleep, and felt, in the specific way you sometimes feel things, at the edge of a day that has been very large. The gratitude that had no adequate recipient, the gratitude that you aimed at the fact of something rather than the cause of it. She went to bed. New Year's Eve was quiet by design. The cafe closed at 3. Olivia had gone home 2 days after Christmas, driving her practical dented car back up the coast, with the specific purpose of someone who has accomplished what they came to do and understands that the rest requires time that cannot be compressed. They'd hugged at the car, properly. Both of them knowing that the hug was provisional, that it didn't close the distance so much as acknowledge that the distance had changed shape, was now something that could be crossed, rather than something that simply existed. Emma had stood on the curb and waved with the focused enthusiasm of someone who has acquired a new person and intends to keep them. New Year's Eve, after the cafe closed, the three of them stayed in. Emma had been told that New Year's was the night when you stayed up late, which she had accepted as information with the gleeful seriousness of someone handed an official exemption from a rule she found arbitrary anyway. By 8 o'clock, she had exhausted herself through sheer force of anticipatory excitement and was asleep on the couch between them, one hand wrapped around Mr. Buttons and the other flopped across Damien's knee with the unceremonious placement of someone who has decided he is furniture she is comfortable with. He looked at the small hand on his knee. He didn't move it. Claire was sitting at the other end of the couch with her feet tucked under her and a cup of tea and the specific quietness of someone who is not performing peace but is genuinely inside it for the first time in a long while. The television was on with the sound low, something seasonal and inoffensive that neither of them were watching. Outside, the harbor was doing its harbor thing, and the town was gathered somewhere in small clusters doing what people did on the last night of a year, counting down to something. She's out, Damien said, looking at Emma. She lasted longer than I expected, Claire said. He looked at the sleeping child, at the hand on his knee. Something moved through his face that she had stopped trying to identify specifically and had started simply accepting as true. Whatever it was that came over him when he looked at Emma, it was real. It had no performance in it, and it had been real from the first morning when a 4-year-old had told him a rabbit's medical opinion was irrelevant because the rabbit hadn't bumped into anything. She's going to be something, he said, quietly, so as not to wake her. She already is something, Claire said. He looked at her. Yeah, he said. She is. They sat in the quiet for a while. The television counted something down in the background, too low to hear clearly. At some point, the harbor let off the kind of distant sound that meant midnight had come somewhere out there in the rest of the world. Last year at this time, Claire said without looking at him, I was up here alone after Emma went to sleep, and I was trying to figure out if the water heater was going to last another winter. Is it going to? He said. Probably not, she said. It makes a sound now. What kind of sound? A sound like it's questioning its choices. He almost smiled. I can send someone. I know how to replace a water heater, she said. I know you do, he said. That wasn't what I meant. She looked at him. What did you mean? I meant you don't have to do every single thing alone. He looked at Emma, at the small hand on his knee, and then back at Claire. Not as a replacement for anything, not as a takeover, just sometimes you can let someone else make the phone call to the plumber. She looked at him for a long moment. The offer was so small and so specific that it was, in its smallness and specificity, more than any large declaration could have been. This was the language they were learning, she thought. Not the language of grand gestures or formal commitments, but the language of plumbers and water heaters and phone calls, answered, and preschool pickups in the right shoes and ceramic rabbits with two complete eyes. "Okay," she said. He looked at her. "Okay," she said again. "You can make the call." He nodded. He looked back at Emma. He shifted slightly on the couch, settling in without disturbing the sleeping child, and Claire watched him do this small, careful thing and thought about all the specific, daily, exhausting, impossible things that made up a life, and how they were not less true for being small, and how the measure of a person was not the grand gestures but the accumulation of the small ones, attended to, consistently, without an audience. She thought about the envelope under the back door and the warm coffee cup in the empty apartment. She thought about Raymond Shea's voice on the phone at 3 in the morning and the drive to the fish-smelling house on the peninsula and Emma asking, "Is it the thing that's been happening at 3 in the morning in her pajamas with her shoes on the wrong feet?" She thought about Damien in Chicago, sitting across from a man he'd known for 11 years and saying that his personal life was not subject to negotiation, which was true, which was the most important true thing he'd said. She thought about the photograph of Emma through the fence. She thought about it with the specific weight of something she would carry for a long time. Not as fear. The fear had passed through its acute phase and settled into something more like vigilance, something she could live with, but as the permanent knowledge of what was possible, what the world contained, what required protecting. The world contained it. She'd always known the world contained it. She'd left Chicago to put distance between Emma and the world that contained it, and had built a life and a cafe and a town-shaped existence to hold the distance in place. And the distance had not held, and she was still here, and Emma was still here, sleeping with her hand on the knee of her father who had come back through his own damage, and the damage he'd caused, and was sitting on her couch on New Year's Eve not pushing for anything, just sitting. That was something. Not everything. Something. In February, Emma turned 5. Claire made the cake herself, chocolate, because Emma had opinions, and chocolate was the opinion. She decorated it with buttercream and a whale, because Emma's whale phase had not passed but had deepened into a fully developed aesthetic commitment that now extended to her drawings, her book requests, and a ceramic whale that lived next to the ceramic rabbit on the windowsill. 2 eyes, 1 eye, 1 whale, in a row. The party was small. A few preschool friends whose parents Claire had developed the cautious, proximity-based friendships of people who live in the same small town through the same cold winters. Mrs. Halloran, who had been coming into the cafe since before Emma could walk, and who treated Emma with the brisk, practical affection of someone who found children reasonable. Mr. Pratt, who ate cake with the same expression he brought to everything. The serene continuity of someone who has been around long enough to understand that the appropriate response to most occasions is simply to be present. Olivia came. She drove up the coast and arrived an hour early and helped with the tablecloths and didn't make a production of it. Emma had been informed that Olivia was her aunt, which Emma had received with the interest of someone being given a new organizational category and had immediately integrated into her worldview without drama. Damien was there. He sat at the counter and drank his coffee and watched Emma work the room with the specific delight of someone who does not entirely understand how they came to be in this particular room, but has decided it is exactly where they need to be. When it was time for the cake, Emma sat at the head of the table with her party hat at a slight angle. She refused to let anyone straighten it, and looked at the chocolate cake with the whale on it and the 5 candles and the people gathered around and said, with great authority, "This is a very good birthday." "It is," Claire said. "Everyone I like is here," Emma said. She looked around the table as she said it. She looked at Olivia, who was smiling with the careful gratitude of someone who understands they are being included rather than assumed. She looked at Mr. Pratt, who nodded solemnly. She looked at her preschool friends, who were already eyeing the cake with the focused desire of people for whom the social niceties were purely procedural delays. She looked at Claire. She looked at Damien. Then she looked at the candles and took a very large breath. "Wait," Damien said. Emma paused with her lungs full, looked at him. "Did you make a wish?" he said. Emma thought about it. She was genuinely thinking, which you could tell because her eyes went slightly unfocused, and her mouth moved without making sound, which was what she did when she was working something out. Then she focused again and looked at Damien and said, "Yes, but I'm not telling." "You're not supposed to," he said. Emma nodded, satisfied, and blew out all 5 candles in one breath, and everyone in the cafe clapped. and the February light came through the salt film windows the way it always did, thin and cold and honest, and the harbor was out there doing what the harbor did, patient and gray and entirely itself, and the cafe smelled like burned coffee and sea salt and chocolate cake, which was the most honest smell in the world. After the party, after the preschool friends had been retrieved by their parents, and Mr. Pratt had gone home, and Olivia was in the kitchen washing dishes with the focused competence of someone who needs to do something with their hands. After all of it, the cafe was quiet in the way it got quiet in the late afternoon when the day's work was done. Emma was on the window seat with Mr. Buttons and the ceramic rabbit and the ceramic whale, arranging them in a configuration that apparently required significant trial and error. The light was going flat. The harbor was settling into its evening gray. Damien was at the counter. Claire was at the other end of the counter, leaning against it, and they were not talking. Were just in the same room, which had stopped requiring commentary. "She didn't tell you her wish," Claire said finally. "No," he said. "She's never going to tell you." "I know," he said. "That's fine." Claire looked at the window seat where Emma was arranging her ceramic animals with the perfect seriousness of someone solving a problem that matters. "What do you think it was?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Something about the whale," he said. Claire looked at him. He looked back. And they held that for a moment. Not quite smiling, not quite not. The two of them standing in the cafe that smelled like what it was, in the town that had become what it was, with the person they'd made between them sitting in the window with a rabbit and a whale and the last of the February light in her hair. Then Emma said, without looking up from her arrangements, "It wasn't about the whale." They both looked at her. She kept her eyes on her animals. Her profile was her mother's and her father's, and entirely her own, and the remaining light caught it in a way that made it look, for a second, like something that had been drawn by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. She didn't say what it was about. She'd said she wasn't telling, and she meant it, and there was nothing in the world that would change that. But she reached over and straightened the ceramic rabbit, turned him to face the harbor, both eyes forward, looking at whatever was out there. And then she settled back against the window cushion and seemed satisfied with where everything had landed. The harbor light moved. The cafe held its warmth against the February cold. Outside, the water worked at the rocks the way it always had, the way it would keep doing long after all of them were gone, patient and gray and permanent. And in the window, with her rabbit and her whale and the light going, Emma watched the harbor and kept her wish exactly where she'd put it.